salmon.
Ooh.
Now, I don't know if this is like a specific ingredient per se, but it's more so a farming practice that's gaining a lot of attention. So this would be your grass-fed, wild-caught, sometimes said pasture-raised, this type of farming, these types of animal products that are farmed in this specific practice. So we're thinking, when I'm saying wild-caught, I'm thinking about things like wild-caught salmon. I get questions all the time, which is better, wild-caught or farm-raised? I'll also get questions about, like, is it really worth it to get grass-fed beef versus corn-fed beef? What does pasture-raised even mean? So let's dive into it. This is the latest obsession. So what do we think?
What I want to make sure we talk about when we do this is we have sort of two, there's actually three areas, but there's two like levels of this that I'd want to make sure we talk about this, which is the level of farming and agriculture, and then the level of human nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sometimes what gets blurred. And so when we, and then when I said those are the two, but then the third thing I want to be factoring in is the biases that exist in the debate. So when you have the organic farming model, wild-caught, grass-fed farms boasting and advertising their ingredients, their intention is that you prioritize buying their products. So they're going to leverage data and stats to their advantage. And the opposite is true. The non-grass-fed, the non-organic, the farm-raised, those sort of the opposites of what we're discussing, they're also going to try and downplay. And that's what can be so tricky, is you're going to see data that is favoring, quote unquote, both sides of an economic reality. And I'm not interested in the tribal nature of farming. I'm interested in the outcomes of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do my best to cut through the BS and the chatter that's kind of a distraction from this, and just lay out objectively what we see and what could have value, noting that the grass-fed companies are going to play up their benefits and the grain-fed companies are going to play down the potential benefits. Mm-hmm. And like most things, the truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. So we just went through a few different words, and they tend to get grouped together, but they do need to be discussed somewhat separately.
So let's start with maybe the grass-fed. What does that mean?
Yeah, grass-fed. So grass-fed typically refers to cow, so beef in particular, and so we'll focus on beef. Grass-fed beef, there's a farming and agricultural conversation, which is the two different types of farming models that exist, and that is a fascinating conversation that I can give a little nudge to, but don't want to make sure we don't spend today's episode talking about the traditional farming versus organic farming models. And then there is the trickle down to human consumption. So just to think about it this way, observing an animal's natural feeding tendencies. Cows eat the grass. And then you have pigs and chickens typically also live on farms, particularly in the United States. And that's where the pigs and chickens then eat the roots and then root through the feces to then get the other nutrients that remain. And so an organic farming model observes that the natural hierarchy of those animals is cow eats grass, and then pig eats root, and then chicken pecks through. And so you can have 5 segments on a farm where the cows are in one and they're eating the grass, and then basically you rotate them through the 5. So the cows go through, and by the time they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the grass has regrown. And then the pigs go through and they eat the roots, and by the time they go through, they're following the cows, and then the chickens go through. And what that ends up creating is a perpetual farming model that requires a lot less upkeep in some ways. Mm-hmm. You're also exposing these animals to a more active lifestyle, a more natural lifestyle. They're not as clustered, which means there may be less need for antibiotics and various other things. So from an organic farming model perspective, that would be the claim to fame there. Like, the reason to do it is for the quality of life of the animal.
There's an ethical
piece, and then there's also a potential like utilization of the land, where I'm going to misquote the actual percentage of this, but it's directionally accurate. It's somewhere around 70% of the America's farmland is currently used to grow crops to feed animals that they don't even eat. So like, we grow corn and soybeans, like 70%-ish. Like I said, that's a directionally correct number. It's a large number of percent of our corn and soybeans is grown to feed cows who don't naturally eat corn and soybeans. And so we're wasting millions of acres of land to grow a crop that also like depletes the soil in a pretty noticeable way, that then is being fed to animals that don't necessarily even thrive on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're using the smaller space to confine the animals, which increases utilization of antibiotics. And there can be conversation about the demand of food is so high that then we start to use hormones to try and accelerate their growth, which you can hear is what has started as almost like an organizational efficiency on a farm, which had genuine intention and good merit and good value, at scale is starting to leak in some ways. So the organic farming model is the observation that, hey, if we did this organic farming model, if we could, here's the big if we could snap our fingers and every farm could be organic tomorrow, you would be able to make more cows, pigs, and chickens with less corn and soybeans, living off the natural land, and have a higher quality livelihood, have a better agricultural system. The problem is we can't snap our fingers and do that. You're going to have to replace corn fields and soybean fields with grass fields. Like, we would basically crash our food economy. So the only way we can do this is you have farms that are naturally shifting, and we're starting to see the balance. Mm-hmm. And as we do that, we're continuing to study the merits. Mm-hmm. I don't feel the need to take a hard stance on anything I just said, but it is to note that a lot of the conversation around organic being better is not necessarily at the human level. It's very much at the agricultural level. And there are interesting studies that will suggest organic farming is more efficient and more optimal and has less downstream consequences and is more sustainable, but it also is harder to scale. And it's also asking to scale it while not completely destroying the food economy that currently props up our tables mm-hmm. and our plates and our refrigerators. And so it's not as easy as just snap our fingers and fix it. And like anything, it's really easy to say the grass is greener and recognize that we're in our current food economy looking at its negatives, thinking, oh, well, if we were over here, it would just, all these things would go away. And it's like, yeah, but we're probably not factoring in second and third order consequences downstream of that one. And I don't claim to be educated enough in the downstream consequences of that model.
Yeah, we're by no means economists or agriculturalists.
Yeah,
we're just dietitians. So
exactly.
what we know is how these different types of, I guess, farming practices can impact the health of human beings. So
yeah, and so let's dig into that piece. So I wanted to make sure we touched on that because a lot of the pasture-raised, farm-raised, or grass-fed is an observation of quality of animal life and is also observation and advocacy towards a farming model that is thought to be better for a variety of reasons. And that's cool. And if you were going to ask me personally, we could have we could dig into that, but we'll shift. We won't fractal too hard down that stream. From there, you then have to ask the question, okay, well, what does that do to the animal? So what we do see is that when you have a grass-fed cow versus a grain-fed cow, just like in humans, they're leaner, first things mm-hmm. first, right? If you have a human that eats a whole bunch of snack foods and refined carbohydrates and doesn't move because they're sitting on a couch just like a cow is in a stall, that cow has a ridiculous amount of calories coming in that it's not used to getting because it usually eats grass, which is not a very caloric food. And so it ends up having a higher fat composition. So when you mm-hmm. cut that into steak, that steak is a fattier. It's a larger percentage of fat. So that's one thing.
Specifically saturated fat.
Yes, exactly. That's that next piece. So then we go, okay, it's a fattier cut of meat, which means it's a higher percent fat, aka lower percent protein. So now we have leaner cows versus fatter cows. Now, fatter cows make more meat by volume, but it's more meat by meat fat. They don't have more protein. They have more fat. And so you tend to, you can say, oh, this cow, whatever, I'm just going to make up numbers. This cow gives us 80 pounds of meat. This cow gives us 100. I know the numbers are a lot bigger than that, but we're saying, oh, so these produce more. Well, that 20 pounds is almost exclusively fat mass. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the pieces. You go, okay, it ends up being naturally a leaner meat, which is mm-hmm. kind of cool. But then let's zoom in further, which is to say, in the fat that exists, what do we see? And just like in humans, our fat tissue, our adipose tissue, some of it is more metabolically active than others. Some is more ready to be utilized. Some has a more deleterious effect to our well-being. Mm-hmm. The same is true for other animals. And so you see that there is an increase in omega-3 fatty acids in grass-fed meat.
Mhm.
And I've seen things that kind of downplay this, but it's about a 30% increase,
Yeah.
which
So
is not nothing at scale.
that's a vastly different fatty acid profile than you would see in the typical fatty acid profile in a corn-fed cow, meaning it's potentially less deleterious to your health.
Yep, that's a great comment. And then from there we say, okay, so it has less fat, and then the fat it does have is a higher percentage of omega-3 and a lower percentage saturated because of the omega-3 and then some of the MUFAs and some of the others. But then take it a step further, the lauric acid and stearic acid and conjugated linoleic acid, which are 3 types of saturated fats that do break down easier in our body. Noting that saturated fat is a category, not a specific fat. And we talked about this a little bit in the last episode. Saturated fats have their hydrogens saturating all their carbons, and so they are really strong. But not all saturated fats are the same because our body likes to break fats in half to metabolize them. Well, there's a class of fats called medium chain triglycerides that are already broken in half. They don't have the same negative effects on LDL cholesterol. They don't have the same effects or like stresses on our body. And so when you look at the higher levels of CLA, stearic acid, and lauric acid, that means that the saturated fats are arguably a more tolerable or better type of saturated fat, and there's less of it in general, but then there's more of the ones that seem to be better for us or better tolerated by us is the phrase I'd rather say. So now we're sitting here going, okay, it's leaner meat, which means it's a higher protein concentration, which is really why we're eating it. It has more omega-3, which is always a desirable thing, and it has less of the saturated fats that are not great for us or harder for us to process, while having more of the ones that are easier for us to process. And when you look at the numbers, they seem very teeny, but when you actually zoom out and think of them at scale, it is inarguably a better quality meat.
Yeah.
Now, you have to pay a premium for it. And what I despise about our society as we play this or that, is that me saying don't ever eat grain-fed meat? No, absolutely not. It has a better price point. It gives you energy. It gives you protein. It is still a great source of iron. It is still a valuable thing. But is grass-fed better in a lot of ways? Yes, absolutely it is. And it's from the farming perspective, arguably yes, down to the human perspective, arguably yes.
The way I explain it to clients is I want you to eat calories like one way. If it's a matter of you being able to afford food or not afford food, I would so much rather you get the corn-fed cow and meat. That said, if you have it in your budget to level up the quality of that food that you buy by any chance, I would say probably start with getting the pasture-raised, grass-fed organic beef, eggs, chicken, because based on all the evidence of the organic food that we have available, I would say, and you can feel free to push back on this if you disagree.
This is gonna be a fun one,
I would say if we're looking at organic food as a whole, those 3 things, like your meat, eggs, fish, those are probably going to give you the most bang for your buck if we're going to be investing in organic foods at all. The produce, I would argue we have less evidence to support that buying organic versus conventionally raised produce has health benefits.
Yeah.
What do you think?
That's a great thing. And to your point, the organic produce is probably a combo for another day because it's a downstream conversation of genetic modification, portion sizing, micronutrients by percentage, but micronutrients by percentage are kind of a fun math-based, illusion. So I'm going to steer us out. I'm going to focus more on the proteins like you said. When it comes to meat, and this is again one of the things I want to make sure I state very clearly. Observing that grass-fed meat has advantages does not discredit grain-fed meat from being a contender and a part of a healthy diet.
Absolutely.
And so to say one thing is not to say the other. And that's a lot of people here, because this is good, this must be bad. That is not what I am saying.
We're massively extrapolating.
Correct. If I'm going to give, and I hate using grading, but for this specific zoomed in thing, giving something an A and a B plus, the B plus isn't an F. It's not a game of A or F. And that's what most people try and do. They try and simplify this to the extreme. Beef is still very nourishing. And what I'd have somebody do, if grass-fed meat is not something they have access to, whether it's financially or just from a genuine accessibility standpoint, can we get a leaner ground beef?
1000%.
Because going back to, let's talk about the actual bigger problem. The average American eats fast food like 8 times a week. And most fast food restaurants serve 75-25 ground beef, which has roughly per 3-ounce portion, roughly 15 grams of protein and 38 grams of fat versus a 90-10. So we go from 75-25 to 90-10, which has 23 grams of protein and 8 grams of fat.
Big difference.
So we just dropped 30 grams of fat off of which is a 270 calorie shift there, while increasing the protein by 50% in your protein source, right? That's the burger that you were going to put cheese and mayonnaise on and have French fries with. And so I would rather you eat leaner meat. And then
that is corn-fed
then not at all, noting that it's still aiming you towards what the grass-fed beef is doing, which is giving you a naturally leaner beef that of the fats that exist is slightly better. Mm-hmm. So we've got to realize that this is a spectrum. It's not a this or that scenario. And when one of the things you and I commonly criticize about a lot of the influencers out there and a lot of the bigger powers that be is they preach from a place of privilege that's so detached from reality, which is like, sure, if we're going to talk about like optimal food, sure, grass-fed beef is absolutely on that conversation. But most people aren't there. Most people aren't even eating enough vegetables. You get to a point where there's so many things that I'd rather them do that's going to create a big ROI than make them feel obligated to triple the price of their meat. That may not be in their reality. And I don't want them then to say, well, I can't get there, so why bother? Mm-hmm. It's like, that's, again, going back to, I can't get an A+ in this class, so I might as well get an F.
Mm-hmm. That all or nothing mentality is so easy to slip into.
Correct. And so that is my big warning as we talk through this, is these ingredient obsessions, there may be some merit to them, but taken too literally and taken to the extreme and in attempting to basically class them as this or that is a very dangerous game.
Absolutely.
I do agree with you. It was funny. The thing I was going to push back is you said chicken initially, but I know you meant fish. And then you said beef, eggs, fish. I agree with you on those three. And we're going to dig into eggs and fish real quick. The reason when you said chicken, I laughed because that's a fun one I want to do last, because this is an example of the nuances of this conversation. So let's go through real quick. Now you have eggs. So you have a chicken that lays the eggs. That chicken is eating its natural diet, and it's also more mobile. We noticed that the eggs it lays have literally triple the omega-3 content.
Yeah. And they have really rich colored yolks, and that's how you can tell the difference.
That bright orange color. And so, once again, does that mean that regular eggs that you're buying at the store that are still $1,000 are bad? No. They are still a great source of nutrients. Mm-hmm. They have choline and B12, and they do have some omega-3s, and they're a great source of protein. If they are a free-range egg that the chicken ate its normal diet and actually had access, and the omega-3 content is up, that is an improvement on that. And you can buy those for $1,200. It's, you pay more. There is validity to the value of that egg yolk, but it is not to the death of the core egg. The egg is still a wonderful thing no matter what. Once again, you start getting into the quality of life of the chicken, the model. There's a lot of influence of the farming model is better, so that's why you should do this. That was the original organic momentum, and then a lot of people just were not buying into that, so they started going into these micronutrient weeds, which there's some validity, but it is not to create a this or that, and I despise the this or that commentary. Mm-hmm. Fish, same conversation. If you have a fish that's out in the ocean, swimming, doing its thing, eating its natural diet, it is going to be a leaner fish. And then the fats that are in it are going to be a better quality fat that is better quality to the life of the fish, but then also better processed by our bodies, versus a fish that is farm raised, that they are tossing some sort of corn-based meal in. And so now we're feeding fish corn, which is like kind of funny when you think about it. And not all farm raised is that, but it is to say that a lot of the fish foods end up being a little bit of that base ingredient stuff. So you end up with a fattier fish that was not thriving, and as a result, it is inarguable that the fat composition is just objectively different. Does that mean you should never eat farm-raised fish? No, it's still a very nourishing thing. Once again, a B+ is still a good grade, and I'm not stating specifically that fish has a B+, but it's just to give you a reference of getting out of that A or F. We need to recognize that just because we give something an A doesn't mean it's what's under it automatically fails. But let's talk about chicken.
What do you think
Because
about
we
chicken?
just spent a whole lot of time identifying that the difference across the three was the fatty acid profile.
Mhm.
What about a chicken breast?
So chicken doesn't have that much fat, so maybe it's far
A
less
chicken
relevant.
breast has almost none.
Mhm.
So the difference there is the antibiotics exposure, the hormones exposure. Let me ask you this. If a chicken is injected with HGH so that it grows faster and its muscle cells go through muscle cell hyperplasia to divide faster to make a bigger chicken breast, and you eat that chicken breast, do your HGH levels go up? No, not even close. That's not even, if anyone's pretending that's science, that is run from that person. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. A hormone that is stimulating the growth of cells does not get consumed by you.
Mhm.
If that was the case, bodybuilders wouldn't need to inject HGH. They would just eat hormonally injected chicken breast.
They'd be saving them a lot of money and a lot of jabs.
So, do I like that chickens are fed all sorts of hormones and antibiotics and stuffed in boxes? No, personally, that's not my favorite thing. Do I recognize that we're 380 million people that love to eat and our Wing Wednesdays are in high demand? Yeah, so like it's, it may be the devil we know right now, but it is to say that the example of this where this ends up falling short is if you're talking about a protein that is a lean protein, all of a sudden the difference is very, very minimal, if even present at all.
Yeah.
A chicken breast naturally has like a gram of fat to 26 grams of protein. If it's organic and it's free range versus it's just a chicken breast that was the traditional farming model, that chicken breast is a chicken breast. It is going to be bigger because of all the things we just talked about, but that protein, those amino acid sequences are the same amino acid sequences. So it is to say that the protein doesn't change across this farming model. The fats change across the model, and that is interesting and relevant and useful. Noting though that if you can be aware of the fats you're consuming, that may make this a negligible conversation.
Yeah.
And then the quality of the life of the animal is arguably different. And then from there, the potential sustainability of the farming model is up for discussion, I will say.
Yeah.
So that is the spectrum that is this whole world of pasture-raised, free range, blah, 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 blah. Now, I guess, is there anything else you want to go from there? I'll stop myself because you know me, I could talk all day.
We nailed it. I think we nailed it. Well done. All right.